to get us ready for the text adventure command line app. So what are optionals? Optionals basically is a type. It gives you two options. Either that optional has a value or it doesn't have a value, right? At a high level, that's what an optional is. You have a box. Inside the box, either there is a value in that box. If it's a string, either there's a string in the box that you could use, or the string is empty or nil. Nil, N-I-L, it doesn't exist, right? Empty value, exactly. So in that box is an optional. I don't know if it has a value I could use in my app.
That's like a cat.
A what?
Cat in the box.
Cat in the box, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So that optional, that cat in that box, Mr. One here. So either I have a value, an int could be optional, a bool could be optional. Any type we've seen so far could be optional, right? So if you see it's a type with a question mark, that means it's an optional. Let's see what that looks like. So we define an optional. We said optional. It's used to indicate that a value may exist, right? May exist. Right. So there's two outcomes for that. So let's see. Two possible outcomes. Outcome one, there is a value and it can be used as normal. Outcome two, there isn't a value. In Swift terms, it's nil. All right? Nil implies you cannot use it. There's nothing there, right? So you look in that box, you're like, hey, I see a string. I want to use that string. But when you open the box, you realize that it's empty, right? It's nil, or null in some other languages, but nil in Swift. Okay? We'll see what that looks like. And as I said before, the data types we've seen before can all be optional. What does an optional type look like? This is an optional string. This is what an optional string looks like. It's the type string followed by a question mark, right? Meaning it's a question, right? It says, it literally asks a question, like, hey, string, do you have a value? Can I use it? So string question mark. We could also see bool question mark. We could also see int question mark. We could also see double question mark. We could also see character question mark. Okay. Cool. Let's see some actual examples of what optionals look like. So let's say we have a response variable, constant here. It's 5. We have a constant, it's 5. What type is 5? String. So if we option click on response, we see it's type string. It's a data type string. So far, so good. If we have an age here that we're getting, and age happens to be response, right? We have an age, it's a response. we're trying to see, we want to cast now, is that string a valid integer? Yesterday we saw casting a float to a double. Today we will see casting from a string to an integer. Let's see what that looks like. So we have int here, open parens, close parens. Right now we're attempting to cast a string to an integer. Anybody could tell me what type do they see age? What's age? When I option click on age, what do I see? I see an int. Is it just int? It's int question mark, according to Yulia. It's int question mark. Right now, I am getting back an optional. In that string, there might exist a valid integer. Right? So the compiler is telling me, hey, you're getting back an optional int. Can I use an optional int directly? Let us see. So I have age plus 10, for example. The compiler is saying value of optional type int must be unwrapped to a value of type int, right? So you need to go from int question mark to regular int without the question mark. So right here is an optional. And you will see optionals a lot through the language, especially in our assignment. You'll be getting feedback from a user through a string, and maybe you tell the user, enter the number of times you want to play the game. You enter 10, the user enters 10. 10 comes back to us like a string, right? 10 comes back in the form of this. We can't use 10 as is right now because 10 is a string. So we need to have a valid number response. In order for us to do the age in that case, if we ask them how old are you, and they enter 27, we need to take that 27 from the string, convert it to an integer, so we could say, hey, now you're 37. 10 years from now, a decade from now, you'll be 37. But currently, we are having an error. This is not going to work. We need to know, is it a value or not? If it's a value, we use it. If it's not a value, we need to do something else. So in order to use that value, that optional value, we have to unwrap it. You see, it says unwrapped here, correct? Do we see unwrapped? We need to unwrap that value, unwrap that gift that we get in. Open that box. We need to unwrap that box in order to see what's inside of that box. There's many ways to do that unwrapping of that box. One of those ways is to use a bang on exclamation mark or forced unwrapping, right? Now the compiler is happy. So this is one of the ways to unwrap an optional. Okay, so let's say ways to unwrap an optional. Okay. Yes. So right now, wow, look at that. So right now we are doing forced unwrapping. What's that? Yeah, so it takes a string, it says, hey, I know you're a string, I know you're an int, I will force unwrap you, I'll use you right away. So this is called force unwrapping. What we just did here is we did example. We took our integer, which is a response, and we said, hey, I am guaranteed, I know that you're an integer, I'm going to use you. What if I'm not an integer and you try to use me? You will get a crash. Let's see what's happening here. So if I play my playground on 25 while my playground is running, I'll get 37 because we see 27 is indeed an int, correct? Okay, great. If my user decides to say, hey, I enter in my age in, I'm going to write out my age. So I am 27. Is the playground still going to work? No, right? We say it's not valid, correct? It's not a valid integer. You could see it. But the computer itself knows how to find an unwrapped string. It's going to unwrap the string. So it attempts to unwrap that string 27 for an integer. We run our app. We're using our Spotify app. And we run it, right? Boom, we get a crash, right? We're using our Spotify app, listening to our music. We click on change playlist. Our app crashes.
I've never noticed it telling you at the bottom exactly what line is giving you the error.
Yeah, so line 22 has an error on it, yes, in the console. Very good.
Does it always give that? The line?
For that crash, it will. Because this crash is a fatal error, right? Fatal error crashes, doesn't matter what happens. It just crashes, boom, the app dies. So we've been using our iPhones, our Android phones, right? Sometimes you're using an app, you see it just kills, it just dies, right? That's a crash, right? The app has crashed. Because somewhere, something went wrong, a developer, whatever, who knows what it is. It might be a crash similar to this one, but that's gonna cause a crash in your application, right?
Isn't a value also a string?
A value. A value?
Like the value is a string.
That string here is valid. When you say value, you're saying 37 or 25? Give me an example. Is a value a string? Give me some. What? Give me give me an example.
But I get it. I understand it.
You understand it?
I'm just trying to get the.
Okay. All right. Cool. So come back to me if you get it. Okay. So this is a force unwrapping. Force unwrapping, you use a bang, right? There are situations where it is valid to use this. I am guaranteed, I know, I'm the developer, I know what's happening, I put a bang, I know it's never gonna crash, right? But if you have the slight inclination that there's a possibility your app will crash, if the user has this option to enter 27, do not use force unwrapping. Dangerous. We see what happened, correct? Okay, so this is option 1, force unwrapping. Yeah.
I noticed that with this one, sometimes if there's an error in syntax, like how it's being typed, then when you fix it, it goes away on its own, like within a couple seconds. With this one, it didn't change until you ran the program.
Yeah, mine is not running automatically. Yours is probably running automatically.
It's not automatic. I had to press the button again for it.
Oh, okay, got it. In that case, you need to fix it in order for it to run because that's a fatal crash, as I said. You need to start playgrounds again. Yeah. Okay, fatal. Yeah, fatal is like bad. It's dead. Okay, awesome. Next way of unwrapping an optional, we'll talk about what's called nil coalescing. What does that look like? Example, I could take my integer up here. I could say response, and I could give it a default value of 21. 2 question marks, nil coalescing. From now on, that's a term we just have to know. Second language. It comes up on interviews a lot. Give me the ways you could unwrap optionals. Nil coalescing is a big one. It's one of the simplest ways to do it. It's one line. On that same line, you put 2 question marks. And that 21 here is a default value. If in case I open that box and response is nil, give me 21, right? If in case I tell the user enter an age and they entered, I don't know my age, some string, right? Some random string. I could say to my app, hey, go ahead and just use 21. That's the default, right? That's the default, it's 21. And it's up to you and your business rules, whichever way your app wants to be designed, to figure out what that default value is, okay? Right here, we pick 21. Maybe it's a drinking game, I don't know. But we pick 21 as that number. Let's see what that looks like here. So instead of banging here using force unwrapping, let's use nil coalescing. So I ask for the age, and I go to 21. and I run my app. And look, I got 31. The user entered an invalid age, so I discounted that, and I went with my default value of 21. I should have kept the, let me keep the old one here for references. I will keep this. Let me. So we said neo coalescent, sorry. Okay, and the one that's valid, nil coalescent, is here. That's the example we just used. Great. So option 1 here is nil coalescent. Oh, sorry, this is false unwrapping. False unwrapping. And this here is using nil coalescent. Okay. So as you see, even if the user entered a bad data, our app didn't crash. Everybody saw that, right? Great. I'll show you a different option. It's called optional binding. Okay, example. You have some value that you bind to. Let's call it binding value. And you have your optional value here. And you have some code. We've seen if before, so we know there's a block we could put our code in for that if statement. What does that look like? So optional binding basically says the optional value response is an optional, we agree? Look at response on the right side of the equal sign. If it's valid, go ahead and assign it to the left side of the equal sign, to that binding value. Go ahead and assign it to binding value, and now we could use binding value in here. We could use binding value in the block, right? If it doesn't exist, it's nil. We could have an else statement to say the value is nil. This is called optional binding. Let's see an example of optional binding. I'll keep our variable here. I'll call it your age. If we're using optional binding, we need to say if let here. You could also say if var, by the way. But if let, if you don't want to change it, if you want to keep it as a constant, you use let. So if let your age equal to, in our case here, I want to copy. Let's not copy. I don't want to copy too much. Let's get in the habit of typing. So response is an optional, right? And we open our curly. We press enter. Xcode gives us a closing curly, right? So far, so good. And if your age, so this your age here is the binded value, right? So if this optional does have a value that we could use. If it's a valid integer, it gets assigned to your age, okay? It's valid on the right, it gets assigned to the left. And now we could use it on line 28. I could print the age you entered is your age, right? Let's see what that looks like. Let's go ahead and run it on line 30. Well, it's not going to print. Why is it not going to print? Anybody? Yes, sir. You don't have your age entry? Well, that's basically a declaration, right? So that's a declaration, right? But why doesn't it get printed? It didn't crash, but what's happening here? The optional, does it have a valid value or no? It doesn't, right? Because look at response. Response is 27. Is that a valid integer? No. So it's nil, right? This value here is nil. So it doesn't print. So we could actually have an else statement here saying print the response value is nil, right? And if we run the playground again, it's going to print the response value is nil because that int response itself is 27. 27 is not a valid integer, right? That is the third way of unwrapping optionals using an if let here. Optional binding. It's called optional binding. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But keep in mind, it's a preview. We'll be covering optionals again. Optional binding, right? So optional binding takes the optional. Int response here is an optional. Do we agree? Yes. So this syntax says if this optional does have a value, right? If it's a valid integer, assign it to your age. If it's assigned to your age, it goes into the if let block and it executes line 28 if it's valid. In our case, currently, it is not valid. 27 is not a valid integer. We agree? Let's give it a valid integer. What's that? In our case, we are not using, this one still works, like age still works. But this one here is still an optional, right? This here is an optional. Our age is not an optional anymore because we took 21. But right now we have nothing to do with age. That age variable is down here on line 34. Our code from 31 to 27 doesn't have anything to do with the age variable. Do we see that? We are using a different variable to exercise our optional binding example. So Steph, line 25 still works for age. Because down here we are using age on line 35. Age still works. Age is still 31. Do we see that? Right? But our other use case is using optional binding 27 through 31. Okay? For clarity, I will take age plus 10 and I'll put it up here. Optionals is a bit one of those topics, right? Again, that's a preview. We'll show it again and again and again until we get it. It's new, it's abstract, somewhat. Yes?
So basically for optional binding, you're not expecting to get a value.
No.
Okay.
I'm trying to get a value.
You are?
I'm trying, right? But I'm not guaranteed.
Okay.
Right? I'm not guaranteed, that's why it's an if let here, and there's a next case here to capture it if in case it's not valid. Right? The if else. Basically, it's like a condition here. So if this is true, execute the age you entered is. If it's true, go to line 29. If it's not true, go to line 31.
Okay.
Yeah.
Possible, like how you said before, that you could just give it a value.
Exactly. So this option here, option 2, is valid. This works. Right? So I'm showing you 3 ways to do optional unwrapping. Step 1 is false unwrapping, right? Which we know what happens there if the value is not valid. So this is option 1. Option 2 is using nil coalescing. Option 3 is using optional binding. It's up to you to figure out which one in what case you should use. Everybody with me? Okay. The if let, again, as I said, if you don't get it right away, it's fine. Preferably, it's easier to use nil coalescing. It's one line. All you do is enter the 2 question marks here, give it a default value, and you're done. Okay, everybody? Okay. If you want to have some sort of else statement to capture if it's nil, an if else is better. So far, so good? Okay. So 1, 2, 3, and let's make it valid. So if we put 27, let me just put 27 here. So if we put 27, what's that? Say that again. No, no, no. Ask the question. It's nil, yeah. You saw a nil, right? Correct? Nil is it's not a valid value.
But do you have the in front of your age?
Where am I now? What's your 1 second? 928. Did I change response? Oh, sorry. I need to fix this. So 27 should go in here. Sorry, guys. And run it again. And at this point, we have the age is 27. Right? Everybody got that? So now it's a valid integer. I tried to unwrap it on line 28. It's valid. So it gets assigned from that optional value into our variable, your age. And now I could go in line 29 and use your age. Because it's valid up here on line 27, on line 22. Question?
So the difference between optional and forced unwrapping is that would match.
Exactly.
But in the end, it's doing the same.
Exactly. So as Amin is saying, that's exactly right, right? Option 2 and option 3 are doing the same thing. Okay? On some code styles, you'll see option 2 is preferable. One line, you're done. Right now, look at that. One line compared to what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Very similar to our ternary operator earlier. Do we remember that? So you could almost picture our ternary operator similar to this here, where we have nil coalescing as opposed to if let. Okay? Question?
Yeah, I was gonna say like, well, can't you just say print number? It would have been the same thing as the.
Yeah, in the 21? Yeah, you could just put a print statement there. Or some sort of. Actually, it expects an integer. You cannot do that. So,
Oh, you can't put a number.
yeah, you can print here. You need to give it that valid data type. So, Tiff, good question. Tiff's question was, can I put a string here? You can't. It
No, not there.
yeah.
So where's the print? Well, no, finish the same. That's what important too.
Yeah, so if you want to use nil coalescing, the default value you've given it has to match the expected data type.
Okay.
Right? So int is expecting int. I can't just pass a string there.
Okay. And my question was that if you did want to print it, like for the third option, if let your age is equal to
After the 21?
no, the third option.
Down here.
Right. So now if you were to put print and then in the strings put a number, that would have been the same as just
Oh, down here you mean? Oh, sorry. What line? What line?
right there. If you were to do
Line 20, line 32?
yeah, like giving it like if not, like else.
Oh, like, yeah, you could use a number there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Else use 21.
But that's the same as just doing.
Yeah, exactly. But it's more work, right? More code?
More work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could go up, sorry. So this is optional binding. Let me just put the steps here too. So we did option 1, we did option 2, and we did option 3. Did I see a hand? Yes, sir.
Yeah, is it possible to use logical operators inside the if let statement?
Where am I looking at? If let here?
Yeah, so in your age equals in response.
You could get more complex there, but I'm not gonna get there. Because already we have that one complex.
It's possible.
Yeah, it's possible to nest it, to chain it. You could also chain it. Like if I get my age back, I could do something else. Yeah. Question? The double question mark itself is called nil coalescing. The 2 question marks, guys, that is nil coalescing. Okay? The 2 question marks. That's what it's called, nil coalescing operator. Oh, it means basically to coalesce a value if it doesn't exist and give it a default value. Do I have default value anywhere? So nil coalescing provides a default value that provides a default value. Nil coalescing allows you allows you to provide a default value. That default value is up to you. Does that capture your question, Lydia? It could be any number. You could pick a number. 23. It could be 23. And it could be any number that you want. At the end of the day, it depends on what the program is. If you're expecting it to be some number, like a default number, for example, like date of birth, and you want date of birth to default to 1978, you could put 1978 there.
What about nothing?
Nothing like this.
Yeah.
Is that valid? Does that compile? It's expecting some value. All those questions are good because if you see that on some question, it doesn't compile. Exactly. Question, sir?
I just want to know if optionals like work in the same way with different data types. Do they work with different data types?
Yes, so they work with those data types we have here. Right? It could also work with custom data types. We'll get into custom data types later. Okay, so that's optionals there in a nutshell. Again, we'll be watching optionals throughout the program. Your interviews, you need to know optionals before you jump on that phone call. If they ask you what's nil coalescing and you get stuck, you won't make it to round 2. Right? So those are the things where we have to really keep notes. Keep notes, keep our projects together so that we could always be able to review. Yes, there's resources like what you should know going into an interview, but those are like the gotchas, right? Like if you go into an interview and you don't know the ways to unwrap, right? You need to know those. There's other ways to unwrap. There's one more way. I'll just put it in here, and I'm not going to go over it right now. We don't need to see it too much, but it's called implicit unwrapping. Example, you could have var name string. It's not force unwrapping, it's like implicit unwrapping, right? We'll get into it later. For the context of today and the lab, all you need to know is the 3 top here, right? You need to know force unwrapping, nil coalescing, and optional binding. Already it's a complex topic, so again, showing you what you need to know for now, and you could go accordingly. So prescribed force unwrapping is not recommended right away unless you exactly know the outcome of what's happening. Because we saw the crash earlier, but with the nil coalescing, we didn't get a crash. With the optional binding, there was no crash, right? Because we guaranteed, like, hey, we'll give you a default value before we actually use that value. Yes, sir?
I'm still not clear on exactly what makes optional binding from the rest of them.
Okay, it binds. Okay, so this optional is an optional, correct?
Yeah.
If it's valid, it binds. It glues that value to the variable you provided. Okay? That's why the binding comes in there. It binds that value. It joins that value, adds that value.
It's when you change, it's when you do something like putting it into ahead of the first case.
This guy?
No.
What line? What line?
30.
Line 30. Okay.
The int in front of
Yeah, the int is casting, right? So int parens is attempting to cast a string to an integer, correct? So this here, good question, Mr. Josh. So let's start. Let's start right here. Where are we? Okay, here. We could put some notes here. Attempting to cast a string to an int using this example here. Okay, so that's what it does. Int parens. Inside parens is response, which is a string. Let's just put a string here, whatever, 45. So int open parens string is trying to convert a string to an integer. We see that? We saw that with doubles yesterday and floats, right? Same syntax. We saw yesterday you have let float 1 equal to 45.9, for example. And we saw double value float value equal to 10.9, 10.3, right? And we said that if we have some result and we say float value plus double value, right? Does this compile? We said no, correct? Correct, everybody? So if I go ahead and run 28, oh, sorry, I need something else here. Why does it compile? Why does it compile? Inferred. Inferred. They're both inferred to be doubles, correct? So for me to explicitly say one needs to be a float, I need to explicitly say, make this guy a float, right? And now, does it compile? No, right? Because they're different types. So far, so good? Okay, so similar to what we did with the integer here, we could go ahead and cast it to a double. Wrap the value we want to cast and play the playground. And now it works, right? Because we've casted that float to a double. So now there are two doubles. We see that? So that syntax here is casting, right? So double, right? And whatever value you want to put in here, in that case, integer value, well, float value. No, that has nothing to do with nil coercion. Basically, what we want to do is take a step back and understand how to cast. Because there was a question about what's the int parens, what does it do? Right? So it's casting is trying to convert a string to an integer. Okay? And the thing you're trying to convert from is inside the parens. The thing you're trying to convert to is the double, is that type that's outside. Everybody with me? I'm trying to get a double here. I'm trying to get an int here. I'm trying to get an int here from a string. Everybody with me? Okay, cool. So that's gonna wrap up the optionals preview. We'll keep doing optionals, but that wraps up the optionals preview.